Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Lebo from GCTV, and I'm here with Mr. Powers. And today we are talking about a committee and an effort to get a statue for a notable historic resident or part of our history recognition in the statue. Can I have you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jim Powers. I'm a former teacher at Guilford High School, where Matt was one of my star students. We won't talk any more about that. But I'm also affiliated with the Dudley Farm Museum, and where we have the Quinnipiac Dawnland Museum. And currently I'm involved with a group of people, a committee that's been formed called the Shaumpishu Statue Committee. And our goal is to have a statue of this incredible woman put someplace in the center of town, preferably near the green.
And how did you get involved with the project?
It was sort of a roundabout way. What I was doing research for one of the books I wrote, Shadows over Dawnland, which dealt with the first 50 years of English settlement along the shoreline and its impact on the Quinnipiac people. And one of the prominent individuals who immediately came to light was this woman, Shaumpishu, who was the sachem or chief of what is now today Guilford. Back then it was called Monunkatuck. And the more I did research on that particular topic, the more her prominence came to light. And then when we were creating the Quinnipiac Dawnland Museum at the Dudley Farm Museum up in North Guilford, once again, the important role that she played in the history of the Quinnipiac people came to light, and she's pretty prominent in terms of the story that we tell about the Quinnipiac people up there.
Now let's go into that story and into the little bit of the history. Who was Shaumpishu?
Okay. At the time when the English settlers or colonists first came to the shoreline area following the Pequot War in 1638, she was the female sachem or chief of the Quinnipiac village or band here in what it was then called Monunkatuck. Her brother was the grand sachem of in New Haven, which was then called Myunkatuck. Now, by grand sachem, I mean that he was the head sachem of all the Quinnipiac people who once lived in the area from West Haven all the way to what is today Clinton and maybe even Westbrook, and as far north as Cheshire and Wallingford. And her uncle was the Quesaquanch, was the sachem in what is now Brantford. Back then it was called Totucket. And right from the very beginning, she played a very important role in the negotiations with the English colonists when they first came, first to New Haven, and then later here in Guilford and Monunkatuck. So that was in 1638, and then later again in 1639. And then throughout her life, she was the major advocate protecting the rights of her people all the way up until the time of her death in the early 1680s.
So she was an essential part of town and Connecticut history.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the things we like to tell people is if it wasn't for Shaumpishu, Guilford and Madison probably would not have become Guilford and Madison, because when Henry Whitfield and his other fellow Puritans came first to New Haven in 1639, they were looking for a place to create their plantation or settlement. And initially, they were going to settle in what is now Milford, Connecticut, which is kind of an advantageous spot because it's at the mouth of the Housatonic River. But in surveying the entire shoreline area, they soon realized that what is now Guilford was actually also an ideal location for them, especially because the area from the harbor up through what is now the Green had been cleared by the Quinnipiac or Monunkatuck people under Shaumpishu for centuries for farming. And they found that it was an ideal location, and they negotiated with Shaumpishu to actually build their town or village, pretty much where the green is today.
And can you tell us a bit about the Minunkentuck and the Quinnipiac people?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I have to back up a little bit by explaining a little bit of the history of the Quinnipiac people, especially in regard to the European arrival. The Quinnipiac, as I said earlier, lived in an area roughly from West Haven to Clinton and up to Cheshire and Wallingford. They were the prominent area people in this part of the shoreline. And in the early 1600s, the Dutch, who had come to Connecticut before the English to trade for beaver skins and cut timber to send back to Europe, had actually established a trading post or fort in what is now Indian Neck in Branford. So one of the things that's interesting about the history of the Quinnipiac as opposed to other indigenous people in Connecticut is that they did have a history of living side by side with the Europeans, in this case the Dutch, because there was the village of Totucket was right there on Indian Neck, next to the Dutch fort. So when Shaumpishu grew up, she was aware of the benefits of living alongside Europeans from the point of view of trade goods and possibly protection from their enemies. What happened in the early 1630s, specifically 1633 and 1634, however, was the fact that smallpox broke out amongst the Quinnipiac and all the other indigenous people here in Connecticut, and it appears over 2 years the Quinnipiac population dropped by 80%. 80% of the people died in those 2 years. So by the time the English then arrive in 1638, their population is greatly reduced. And Shaumpishu and the other leaders of the Quinnipiac saw, with the arrival of the English, the possibility of not only obtaining European trade goods, but also receiving protection from the English from their enemies. Specifically, they mentioned the Mohawk and previously the Pequot, and that in a lot of ways led to their negotiating with the English when they came. So,
and you kind of touched on it. When the settlers first arrived, what were their interactions like with the Minunkentuck band?
Well, from everything that historians have been able to uncover up to this point, as well as my own particular research, the relationship with the Minunkentuck and the Quinnipiac in general was relatively peaceful. There was never any conflict. In the beginning, the Europeans, especially the English, needed the expertise of the Quinnipiac and the Minunkentuck in order to live here successfully. Everything from fishing to hunting, and just basically understanding the environment and how to live within it, because it was so different than the English. And so there was sort of a relationship where they were mutually dependent upon each other. As time went on, however, as the English population grew, and that grew relatively quickly, partly because this was during the time of the Puritan diaspora, when thousands of English Puritans were leaving England to come to New England, the Quinnipiac began to become marginalized. And one of the problems that they faced was the fact that as its English population grew, they established farms and they cut the forests, and suddenly the Quinnipiac was faced with a situation within 50 years that they could no longer maintain their traditional lifestyle that had sustained them for thousands of years, which was basically a routine of seasonal migrations, taking advantage of the natural resources that were available in each season. And suddenly with the forests gone, and a lot of the animals go on, and it became difficult for them.
And What was the land negotiations like with the original settlers?
That's the interesting part, which is, to this day, incredibly controversial. When the English came here, they came here with the idea, in the English tradition, of property rights and private ownership. They believed that they came from a culture where property or land was a commodity, which individuals and groups could obtain for their private use. The indigenous people, the Quinnipiac included, always believed that it was no one owned the land, that the land was there for everyone to share and to use. And therefore, when the English came, the negotiation was such that the English wrote in a traditional English legal style. And from their point of view, they believed that they were purchasing land from the Quinnipiac and later from Shaumpishu and the Monunkatuck here. And it says so in these agreements. Culturally, the Quinnipiac people, like all Algonquian people of New England, believed that it was impossible to own land, but it was important to share land. And especially part of their culture was when somebody came to you and said, we need a place to live, you welcomed them and you provided them with a place. So I'll give you an example, or two examples. What the negotiation in 1638, when the English first came to what is now New Haven, it was negotiated that the English would live in the area which is now where the New Haven Green is, and the Quinnipiac would continue to live on the east shore of New Haven Harbor, where Fairhaven and East Haven is. And then the idea was that all the other land would be shared by both parties. When Henry Whitfield and his group came here in 1639, it was the same sort of thing. The Quinnipiac agreed and Shaumpishu agreed that the English would settle in basically where the green is, we'll call it, here in Guilford. And then Shaumpishu and her group then actually moved across the East River, which was called the Kudowo then, to what is now Madison, to live there. And the idea was that they would continue to share the land. And that pretty much continued off and on all the way up until the mid 1860s, when the Quinnipiac and the English were sort of mutually utilizing what later on became North Guilford.
Okay. And you said the 1860s?
I mean, 1680s.
1680s.
Yeah, dyslexia.
Yeah, I just wanted
to... dyslexia.
Yeah, I just wanted to get those.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, now, main topic, how did the idea of installing a statue of Shaumpishu come about?
Well, it's sort of a idea that sort of generated itself in a number of different ways. The more I learned about the importance of Shaumpishu, and to not just to this region, but in terms of the history of her people and what a strong advocate for their rights and she was. I always thought that would be a great thing to honor her. I did during, I don't know, I can't remember if it's during COVID, but I did a talk for the West Lake Homeowners Association via Zoom one day. And I was talking about the history of West Lake simply because after Shaumpishu's death, her son Nassau became the sachem of what was still considered Monunkatuck, including North Guilford. And he negotiated with the English for their ability to settle what becomes North Guilford. But part of that agreement was he established a settlement or a village at what is now West Lake, which existed all the way up until the 1830s. And so as I was talking about the history of that area with the association, I told them a bit about Shaumpishu, and a number of the two people in particular from that group, Ellen Crean and Cheryl Buckley, who are both members now of this committee, became totally inspired about why Shaumpishu should have a statue. And I ran with it with them. And they really are the heart and soul of this effort. These are two women who've had incredible careers professionally, and boy, I'll tell you, they believe deeply in the history of Guilford and the shoreline, and they have absolutely tenacious in their ability to try to get this message across. And I'm just riding the wave with them. They're just awesome.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Now, where are possible locations for the statue?
Well, that's one of the things in our minds, we have the ideal location would be the Green, which of course there are a lot of political and cultural issues associated with that, and we would like to see the statue somewhere in the vicinity of the Green, if not obviously ideally on it. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of different locations around the Green, in front of the town hall, in front of the library, and a couple of others that I think would be appropriate. And one of the reasons why we would like to see it near the Green is because the Green in Guilford is the heart and soul of the community. And because she would represent not only an important player in the history of Guilford and the settlement of this area, but also she represents, over 10,000 years of indigenous people living here. She also represents indigenous people who are still here, past. We're looking at people past, present, and future, but also as a role model for not just women and girls, but for everyone, men as well. That it is possible against incredible odds during times of incredibly difficult times of change and transformation, that she showed how you can really do the best you can to support your people and advocate for them and fight for their rights. And I think she's a great role model for everybody to see. And so that's why we're hoping that the town fathers will deem it something that we could do. I want to mention, however, that our committee is a 501(c) nonprofit, and we are not asking the town for any funds whatsoever. This is going to be solely funded by donations. Mm-hmm. We've begun the process of raising money already, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for this project. So,
skipping over a few questions that I will then go back to since he touched on it. You're mentioning fundraising. Who will be in charge of installation and then maintenance?
That's a really good question. Our goal is to have this funded purely, as I said, by private donations, and then our idea would be to have a fund set up in perpetuity, which will maintain the statue.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be a responsibility of the community at all, of the town.
And would you have an ideal material, like metal, some sort of stonework?
We're right now, our preferred medium would be bronze. Mm-hmm. And we are in the process of locating and beginning the communication with a number of artists who work in that medium. Our preferred artists, obviously, from just a point of view that we think would be important, would be an indigenous individual, preferably even an indigenous woman. And so once we have settled on a location, we will in earnest begin the process of looking for proposals from artists.
And do you have an ideal design? Like, what are some of the basic design requirements?
Well, we would like her to be portrayed as she would have appeared in the 1630s. And in order to do that, we are actually in the process of creating an advisory council of indigenous individuals. We have a number of people already, indigenous women in particular, who have agreed to to be on that committee. Some of them are indigenous individuals from southern New England here, including the clan mother of the Paugussett Nation in Trumbull, Connecticut. And then also some other folks who are associated with some of the academic institutions, Yale in particular. But we want these folks to be, to help us accurately portray how she would have appeared. Because for us, that's important. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all have in our minds what an indigenous person might have looked like, but their voice is really important. And when we were creating the Quinnipiac Dawnland Museum in North Guilford at the Dudley Farm, we realized that was important too. And we never made any decision in terms of displays or exhibits or even artwork without the input from indigenous people, because we wanted their voice and their ideas and their vision to be paramount. So that's going to be part of the fun of this whole process. I'll tell you right now. I'm looking forward to that.
Oh yeah. Who have you in the town have you broached the idea with, and have you received support from any prominent members of the community?
We've been reaching out to community groups, and we have a whole list of them at this point that we can certainly will be making public. We also have reached out to the various historical organizations in town. We're still in the process of doing that. We also have a list of academics, archaeologists, historians. People. We have a great endorsement from the city historian of New Haven, for example, and our own town historian Joe Haylander has endorsed this, and a lot of the indigenous individuals who we've reached out to have endorsed this as well, and we're continuing to do that. So we're really excited. Anyone we've talked to in town has shown tremendous enthusiasm. Religious groups, community organizations. It's really gratifying to see how the community is embracing this.
Oh, fantastic! Can you tell us about your outreach efforts?
Well, that's pretty much based on our committee, and the committee is primarily made of 4 of us at this point. But we are continuing to reach out to different groups. One of the nice things about it is we all 4 of us have connections in different areas, which will make it really, really sort of nice. Dr. Michael Bracken, for example, is retired from Yale University, and he has really been successful in reaching out from people from that institution and beyond Guilford. I have a lot of contacts in the archaeological community and historical community over the years, as well as contacts with indigenous groups. And then Ellen and Cheryl have also had contacts with people and organizations that they've been involved with for many, many years. So it's really a great team effort. That's what it is.
And what can you hope that the statue can provide to the town?
We want people to look at that statue and appreciate, first of all, who she was and what she meant to not only her people but to this community. And also, we want people to see her as a role model for how a strong leader, and especially a strong woman leader, can make a difference. And despite incredible odds and an incredible catastrophe that actually befell her people, how she was able, right to the very end, to fight for their rights. And one of the things I found so interesting right in the beginning when I was first actually going back to the days when I was teaching, is how very often we look at the history of Europeans and European Americans and their relationship with indigenous people, not very positive. I mean, the word genocide is, to a certain extent, not even enough for what happened. However, the English settlers here in Guilford and then later Madison had a really a nice relationship with them. And I very often will tell people that a good example is this. At one point, a Quinnipiac man and his son, they were fishing along the shore. This is after the English had arrived here, maybe 20 years later, maybe 30 years. I can't remember exactly when. And somehow there was an argument. And one of the English men living in town here killed the Quinnipiac boy. The Quinnipiac man then, obviously in a rage, killed the Englishman. He was arrested and stood trial in Hartford for the murder of an Englishman. The people of Guilford rallied to his defense, and because of their advocacy for him, he was acquitted of the crime, which was highly unusual at that time for something like that to happen. I think if the worst you could say about how things developed here in Guilford was probably just benign neglect, if anything else, because as the economy changed and the Quinnipiac people were forced with a situation where they just couldn't function within the English economy anymore, they all began to drift away.
And lastly, how can people find more information about the project, or how can they make donations to help?
Well, we have a 5013C set up, and oh gosh, I wish I had that. We have individuals can send donations to that. Of course, I didn't bring the address, so that's not going to help here. But we will be making more information available very soon publicly about how that can happen. We eventually would like to have a social media presence, which will also be very, very helpful. I guess I can't remember if the address to send donations was in the Courier article or not. It might have been, but I don't quite recall. But there'll be more information about that as time goes on. We're looking at this probably as maybe another 2-year project. So it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and talking with us.
Well, thank you, Matt. This is really a pleasure, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to let the story of Shaumpishu get out there.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to seeing you at the unveiling.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. With your camera.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.